Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today at the Lesson 6 exam review. Before we get started, we'd like to introduce you to ourselves. My name is Zach. I'm one of two Spanish teachers here at Penn Foster. With us here today also is Dan, available to answer any of your questions that you may have. You do have a variety of ways to get in contact with both of us throughout your Spanish course. First is by phone, 1-888-427-1000. We are here Monday through Friday, 9 to 6 Eastern Time. And when you call in, you do want to select option 5. You do have the ability to email and chat with us. If you have a quick question, you can text the word learn to 39033. If you do have more detailed questions, you can feel free to set up an appointment with one of us. And we do encourage you to check out the 2 academic resource websites on the left for some worksheets and extra help with the course. I'd like to introduce you to the software that you are using for today's session. You do have the ability to raise your hand if you have a question, and you can definitely ask any questions you have in the questions box. So on today's objectives, we're going to cover 3 things. The first is explaining commands and their formation. We're also going to talk about some of the most common irregular verbs in this unit and how to conjugate those in present tense. And finally, we're going to distinguish saber and conocer, which are the 2 verbs to know, and how to conjugate those in present and imperfect tenses, which is one of the past tenses in Spanish. To start off with, there are 4 parts to this exam number 6. The first is matching. You'll be doing commands here. The second and third part is verb conjugation. In part 2, you have irregular verbs in present tense. And in part 3, you're going to be, again, distinguishing between saber and conocer and conjugating in either the present or the imperfect tense, depending on the English translation. And then finally, in part 4, this will be reading comprehension. You'll be answering true or false. So let's start off with formal commands, and we're going to be talking about formal commands with regular verbs. So as it says here, formal commands are also known as the usted or ustedes commands. These are going to be the third person. You would use usted when you're talking with one unfamiliar person or if you're showing respect. So for instance, if a student is talking to a teacher. And you're going to use ustedes when you're talking with more than one person. And you can use this with both the familiar and unfamiliar settings. Also, it says positive and negative formal commands are formed the same way. First step would be conjugating the first person singular present indicative. As we know, all of those forms do end with an O. We're going to drop the O and then add the subjunctive ending for the third person singular or plural. So again, depending on how many subjects you're talking to. Next up, we're going to look at a few examples of some verbs. So as a refresher, we did want to talk about the endings. These are, again, the third person singular and third person plural subjunctive endings that you will be adding to your stem to determine the command. So with AR verbs, you have an A or N, and with ER and IR verbs, A or an. So our example here, hablar, if you say hable, means speak, or no hablen, don't speak. With the second verb, it's an IR verb, escribir. So escriba means write, and no escriban, don't write. So moving away from commands just for a minute, we're going to do a quick review here on reflexive verbs. And a reflexive verb is a verb that indicates the action is done to oneself. So we use these verbs for daily habits, like brushing your teeth, combing your hair, etc. And we give the example here of lavarse, to wash one's hands, hair, etc. So when we conjugate a reflexive verb, we do need a reflexive pronoun plus the conjugated verb form. So that's shown in that first example. Me lavo las manos. I wash my hands. We do need to indicate that me as our reflexive pronoun. And just as a review, in the first person we have me, second person singular te, third person singular se, first person plural nos, and third person plural se again. So, me lavo las manos, I wash my hands. Again, this is a reflexive verb sentence. This contrasts with the second example. We do not see the reflexive pronoun me. Instead, we just have lavo, which is your verb, I wash, los platos, the dishes. So in this case, lavo would be our verb, los platos is our direct object. And then in our third example, we give an example of a command using the reflexive verb. Or I'm sorry, not using the reflexive verb. So in this example, we have lave los platos, wash the dishes. As it says at the bottom, reflexive pronouns such as may in the example above should precede the conjugated verb form. And again, this is not in command form. So going a little bit further here with commands, and specifically commands with reflexive verbs. When we talk about positive commands using reflexive verb, your reflexive pronoun should attach to the command, and it forms one word. So again, using our example of lavarse, if we wanted to use the usted, the third singular command, we'd have lave plus the pronoun se. So lávese las manos, wash your hands. If we wanted to say a negative command, we're going to have the word no plus a pronoun, the reflexive pronoun, plus the command. So we could say no se lave las manos. Don't wash your hands. A little bit of a review on present indicative up next. So we wanted to show you some of the verbs you may be tested on for this lesson. And our first is tener. This is one of the verbs means to have. So we show you the full conjugation here. Tengo, tienes, tiene, tenemos, and tienen. Example sentence, ella tiene muchas amigas. She has many friends. The second example is venir, and venir means to come. Our verb forms would include vengo, vienes, viene, venimos, and vienen. So yo vengo a la fiesta, I come to the party. These are both going to be irregular verbs, as you can see, especially with the first person having that G right off the bat. But we do see there's a little bit of a stem change as well in the other forms. So important verbs to remember. You do want to write these down. They will be useful for this lesson. A couple more. Next is volver. This means to return. See the full verb forms. Conjugate it once again. Our sentence, volvemos de la escuela a las 3 de la tarde. We return from school at 3 p.m. And our fourth verb, salir, to leave. Another irregular verb with that G in the first person singular, salgo. Sale, sale, salimos, and salen. Our example, sales de la casa ahora. Are you leaving home now? And the next thing we want to review is the differences between saber and conocer. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, these verbs both mean to know, but they are used differently depending on context. So a couple of key differences. When you use saber, that you're going to use that when you know something for fact, something for general information, or knowing how to do something. And when we use conocer, this is more of a knowing or an acquaintance verb. So if you're familiar with a person, place, or thing, use conocer. So in English, give you some examples. Use saber, for example, I know the truth, or I know how to ski. Versus conocer, you could say, I know or I'm familiar with a person or the city, etc. A lot of different variations we can have there. So we do want to show you the conjugation of saber and conocer in present tense. So starting with saber, it's another irregular verb, really just in this first person singular form, say. So say, sabe, sabe, sabemos, saben. We have some examples here below. Sé la respuesta. I know the answer. Again, we're using saber here because it's certain. You know it for sure. Or sabemos que los estudiantes están tomando los exámenes ahora. We know the students are taking their tests now. We know this undoubtedly. We see it happening. No room for interpretation. Moving over to conocer. Again, this first person singular form is our irregular with the Z in there. Conozco, conoces, conoce, conocemos, conocen. So some examples. Conoces a Tomás. Do you know Thomas? This is if you're familiar with Thomas or you're acquainted with Thomas. And los niños conocen a sus padres. The children know their parents. Again, we can see the differences of context within these four sentences, so we do want to draw some differences between saber and conocer here. They will not be interchangeable, so it really is up to you to determine, the correct verb to choose. Next up, we want to show you the conjugation of saber and conocer in the imperfect tense. Again, imperfect being one of the past tenses in Spanish. Starting with the saber, we have sabía, 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 sabíamos, and sabían. So you have pretty much the same sentences, although there's a little bit of variation, so we'll go over these also. Sabía la respuesta, I knew the answer. And the second sentence, sabíamos que los estudiantes estaban tomando los exámenes más temprano ese día. We knew that the students were taking their tests earlier that day. Again, we're using saber in both of these sentences because they undoubtedly occurred. We know it for certain. Moving over to conocer, you see similar endings on conocer as you do with saber. So conocía, conocías, conocía, conocíamos, and conocían. So conocías a Tomás. Did you used to know Thomas? Or los niños conocían el antiguo parque. The children were familiar with the old park. Again, we're using conocer with these two sentences on the right due to familiarity. And that does wrap up our webinar for today. We hope that this Exam 6 review is helpful for you as you prepare to take this written exam. If you do have questions, please feel free to ask those at this point. You do have the contact options as well as those academic resource websites listed on your screen once again, so feel free to use those. We thank you for your attention today and hope you do well on your exam.